But he says that he has hidden things from the wise and the learned and revealed them only to little children. And it makes a big thing about, yes, God has chosen to do it this way. And that's annoying, isn't it? And of course, children cease to be children and become wise and learned, hopefully. I know what you're thinking, and the answer is yes. I have once again only managed to get through a single chapter of the book of Matthew, and before I generated a massive pile of questions to try and deal with. So yeah, this is Matthew chapter 11. This opens with John the Baptist, who is now suddenly in prison, and he sends some of his disciples, for he has disciples of his own because he was that big a deal. He sends them to Jesus to say, are you this person who was to come, or should we be waiting for someone else? Jesus, in somewhat typical theme, I think there's going to be a theme going through this, answers cryptically, or rather doesn't answer at all, and just says, go back to John and tell him about all the miracles that I've been doing and all the rest of it. Like that should basically give him an answer. But it occurred while I was reading that, Elisha, back in, was it 2 Kings, I think it was, he was just knocking out miracles left, right and centre. So this is not the first person to come along performing a load of miracles. And yeah, I get they're a bit different this time, and they're much more abracadabra than Elisha's with having to make things happen. But even so, it's not like the presence of miracles itself is new for the Israelites, I think. Something like that. I also thought that when Jesus went to be baptised by John the Baptist, there was a bit of an awkward moment where John's looking at him going, I can't baptise you, you're like the big dude. And Jesus seemed to be like, yes, I know, but you've got to do it anyway to fulfil all decency, or no, fulfill all prophecy, or something like that. So I thought he sort of knew he was that dude, and they sort of established that. But I guess that's probably a bit of a process, isn't it? And John the Baptist presumably wouldn't have known what was going to happen when Jesus did turn up. So yeah, I guess then he's gone to prison. It's not going very well for him, is it? So it makes sense perhaps that he would check. We also have this interesting bit that comes from Jesus where he says, blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. It's like, okay. But handily, I basically any excuse to get a new Bible translation, I'm all over it. So I have, can't really tell from that, can you? It's the N.T. Wright translation. So he's based on a more modern translation, trying to be more careful of something about that. And it reads a lot more casually. But his translation of that, it says, and God bless you if you're not upset by what I'm doing. Which is, yeah, I think that does actually help, doesn't it? A translation that puts it more into everyday language, I think is actually quite helpful. So, yeah, so Jesus is saying, bless people who do not stumble because of things he's doing, i.e. people who just sort of expected that he would turn up. But I assume that's not very many people. Jesus then goes on to talk to John the Baptist's people and says to them about John as being a particularly great man, even going so far as to say that among those born of women there has never been anyone greater than John the Baptist, yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. So that's confusing for a number of reasons. I mean, partly we've got King David, who's like the super duper God's kind of favourite, as it were, 1,000 years ago, but still well regarded and a bit of a hero in terms of theological things. So he's not greater than John the Baptist. Interesting. And what's an example of someone who's the least person in the kingdom of heaven is greater than John the Baptist? So who is in the kingdom of heaven? And then you've got the least of people in the kingdom of heaven suggests a hierarchy of people in the kingdom of heaven. So you can be a big cool dude in the kingdom of heaven, or you just be a lowly person. But yeah, so the lowliest person in the kingdom of heaven, which is drawing near, that Jesus has already told us, is better than greater than John the Baptist. I mean, what do you do with that? It's really odd. I have tried to get this straight in my head, so I've put together this thing on PowerPoint to try and illustrate what I'm thinking is about right for the kingdom of heaven, and noting in that the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven are the same thing, as far as I'm aware, and they're just sort of amalgamated, terms used interchangeably. So you can see here we basically have the Old Testament period, which seems to be pre-kingdom of heaven. So it's just people doing what they're doing and that sort of thing. We then have Jesus arrives, and this talks about the things being up to the point of John the Baptist. So it seems to be there's a critical point where Jesus and John the Baptist meet. That then ushers in the first phase of the kingdom of heaven, I think. It seems we then have a fairly short first phase of the kingdom of heaven, but if it starts at the point that John the Baptist baptises Jesus and then ends at the point where Jesus is crucified and then resurrected, so that's sort of phase 1 done at that point. Phase 2 starts this day that Jesus comes back to life and goes back out there, or potentially 40 days later when he ascends to heaven. I don't know, but I'm not going to worry at that minute detail. So phase 2, anyway, is around that time with Jesus, something to do with him coming back to life. And we're in that phase 2, clearly. So that's thus far, it's 2,000 odd years old. And then it seems we've got the third phase, which is going to be when the judgment day comes. And then that's going to be the new creation, physical earth, sparrows, wasn't it? God was going to look after sparrows. Vipers won't bite you if you put your hand in their nests. And that goes on for eternity. So there's maybe something in there that John the Baptist is largely in his life on the basis that his life is not going to go on much longer. Spoilers. His life is pre-kingdom of heaven. So part of his job was to help bring about the kingdom of heaven. So anyone in the kingdom of heaven, therefore, is in a better situation than John the Baptist was because he was before it. Something like that, maybe. I'm conscious as well with this, because this obviously a timeline implies temporal stuff, for want of a better word. But God will be outside of time by definition of having created time in the universe. Otherwise, he's not God. Therefore, he must have done that. Therefore, he must be outside time. Therefore, he's not bound by it. Therefore, it's unlikely he's going to think temporally, I guess, to some extent. So you'd sort of expect to find in some of this stuff that some of it doesn't make sense if you think in terms of time being linear. I don't know if you can see smoke coming out of my ears. So hard, this stuff. But I do wonder, is that suggesting that someone who lives after the kingdom of heaven comes about is more fortunate than John the Baptist was because he was pre? Something along those lines. Jesus then reveals that a lot of the towns he's been in performing loads of miracles haven't repented of their ways and have just carried on being terrible people. I just sort of odd, isn't it? You can hear about this guy coming along and spouting about the kingdom of heaven. Albeit, I suppose if you're confused about what the kingdom of heaven is, and you've got the Pharisees running around saying he's casting them out by the power of demons, which I think might be a spoiler, that might be we look at next week. But you know what I mean. So is it reasonable that they're not then behaving when he's come along doing that? I mean, is there an argument that it just wasn't clear that he's doing these miracles because you've got to sort yourself out and start behaving properly? But Jesus, even to the point of saying that when judgment comes, it will be easier on Sodom and Gomorrah than it will have been on these towns who've seen all these miracles. He's saying that if he'd gone into Sodom and Gomorrah and done those miracles, they would have repented of their ways. A little bit sceptical journey face on that. I'm not so sure. They were really, really bad, weren't they? But yeah, I guess that's all tied in with this Judgment Day thing, which is really difficult. There is an interesting one, though, because Jesus talked about when judgment comes for Sodom and Gomorrah, which are long gone, 1,500 years ago or something, when the fire and brimstone fell from the sky and wiped them off. So, again, going back to this non-temporal lineage idea, is it fair to say that Sodom and Gomorrah have already been judged? And by our timeline, it happened 1,500 years ago. By God's timeline, presumably everything is happening simultaneously because he's not bound by time. It's difficult to wrap your head around that, isn't it? But could Judgment Day have already happened for a lot of people? That's interesting. I mean, I guess it's almost like a scientific model that you could apply to theology or something, some sort of amalgamation between science and theology, to the extent I don't grasp either. We then have an interesting bit from Jesus where he says, basically to God, that God knows obviously, but he says that he has hidden things from the wise and the learned and revealed them only to little children. And it makes a big thing about, yes, God has chosen to do it this way. And that's annoying, isn't it? But because children are not the most reliable people to pass that on. And of course, children cease to be children and become wise and learned, hopefully. So, yeah, it's like the same is true of Santa, isn't it? Let's be honest. So it's a slightly problematic model, I suppose. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. He also then says about that no one knows the Father except the Son. So he's saying he is the Son. And no one knows the Son except the Father. But people can know the Father via the Son if the Son chooses to reveal the Father to them. I think that's right. So I mean, that whole section being a little bit about things aren't going to be clear, most people aren't going to understand. To be fair, I think that's kind of reasonable because the whole big picture fits together. It doesn't work if everyone has all the answers, I guess, because it's that gun to your head idea, isn't it? But and then finally, Jesus talks about his burden is light and you can get rest through him to some extent. But Jesus' burden is not light, is it? I mean, he's come to sacrifice himself. And Matthew is writing this at the point where he knows that's happened. So it's really weird when Jesus is saying that, when his burden is not light at all, or perhaps he's saying that he will help you with your burden because he's like super powerful and God and stuff, albeit not saying I am God. But yeah, so I mean, very small bit of writing, just over a page, about like a page and 2 lines sort of thing. And that generates all that, and not quite sure. But I think we're making some progress on the kingdom of heaven, what that is. I think getting a bit better in terms of trying to think about angles to look at this stuff from. And a lot of this stuff does seem to be sort of cumulative in the understanding. So, well, certainly I'm finding I understand more as I cover more, and then it sort of builds up and you fill back in stuff. So clearly I'm going to have to read this thing again, aren't I think, when it's all done. Mind you, at this rate, it's going to take forever to finish the New Testament. But yeah, on we will go and see what happens next.